sourcing the right talent becomes incredibly important and a lot easier once you understand the depth of experience that someone needs to have within the specific technologies that we're talking about. And then determining whether someone needs to be able to manage, able to lead, or whether they can be a solo contributor.
Let's start discussing about why documentation is important in the operation system. So in this case, what's the difference between fast and slow AI hiring having not content documentation?
Yeah, documentation is a big thing because you've basically memorialized what the expectations are for the person that you're hiring. Even very experienced people can say, hey, I know it when I see it, and I'll hire the person when I see the right person. And that sounds good, but it only really works if one person is doing the interviewing and making the hiring decision, which isn't generally the case. And so when you don't document what's necessary, it means more discussions amongst the team, it means more interviews, it means a lot of different things that delay the hiring process. And in the world of AI hiring, which is just a complete chaos, those delayed decisions can mean many lost candidates.
And let's talk more about technically what will be the cost of having or not having the right documentation.
Yeah. So the cost of not having the right documentation, again, is primarily a delayed process, but it's really the perspective that a good candidate has on the business during the interview process. And so when we think about AI hiring and how much demand there is for great AI talent, someone sits in an interview process and they're not confident that the company has a solid direction, they're not very convinced to take the role. And so what it can cost you is a great hire because that person is also evaluating the business, right? And so to the extent that you can define what you want, understand what you want, that comes across in the hiring process. And candidates actually take that into consideration because you want to feel more comfortable about going into a situation when you know what you're going to do within a certain band, but you're comfortable that you're working with people who are also high aptitude.
Okay. What does a best-in-class AI role brief actually look like?
Yeah, so brief just meaning job description and expectation. So I think one key thing is what is the business outcome the role is expected to achieve. Defining that is important because it sets the stage for everything else. And then what's the technical mandates? What will this person be working on? As well as their seniority level. Seniority level is actually really important because if you just do a list of technologies they need to have experience with, I mean, a junior level person can have experience with a lot of different technologies, but depth matters. And so entering into conversations with candidates, well, I should say, not even just entering into conversations, sourcing the right talent becomes incredibly important and a lot easier once you understand the depth of experience that someone needs to have within the specific technologies that we're talking about. And then determining whether someone needs to be able to manage, able to lead, or whether they can be a solo contributor, especially if we're talking about in a remote work environment where communication is paramount.
Okay. What does the compensation band needs of writing rationale?
Honestly, it's going to save time, right? There's the temptation to put out a job description without a compensation band. And in that case, you're going to get a lot of candidates who are really good but would never accept the band that you've offered. In that case, you're still wasting your time. Or people read your job description or they listen to the pitch and there's no compensation band and you go all the way through a process with the candidate. You cut loose all of these other candidates who could be good and would otherwise accept the compensation, only to arrive at the end with the person you really like, and that person says, I would never accept that compensation. And so it seems like the right thing to do to not name compensation up front, but you got to think about pipeline, right? Like we're not talking about low skill labor. We're talking about highly skilled labor who have options, right? And so transparency is going to be very important. And quite frankly, even if your band doesn't fit a particular candidate, most people are willing to continue to look at the job and be honest, right? And say, hey, look, my expectations would be a bit higher than the band. Would you be willing to flex? And if you are, that's great. If you're not, you saved yourself some time.
Now let's go to talk about the work sample rubric and the question bank. So what is the difference between a work sample exercise and a take-home assignment?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because you have to think about who you're trying to hire. I think many people think about take-home assignments as an opportunity to see how much depth a candidate can go, like how deeply can they think and how well can they prepare a presentation. It sounds good, but many really good candidates already have jobs. And so if your first portion of the process, you're telling them to do a take-home assignment, they're like, look, I got a job I'm happy with. Why would I spend my weekend doing a take-home assignment? Unless you're Google, Facebook, or you're offering some ungodly amount of money, right? What's the incentive for that person who otherwise is really good to do a take-home assignment? So it introduces friction into the process. The more friction you introduce, there are going to be people who fall out of the process. Now, I would say that there are ways, if you are experienced yourself, there are ways that you could have a lower friction hiring process without implementing deep take-home assignments. And that's the ability to sit with a candidate and talk through trade-offs, right? What are the decisions that you can't make by simply Googling, right? Talk to me about projects that you've worked on, and then what were the challenges in those projects? What did you have to solve? What were some of the tough decisions you had to make? And the fluidity with which someone can have that conversation on the spot tells you a lot about what they actually did, because at that point they're just telling a story. They're just recounting what happened. Versus you give me a take-home assignment, I could go home, do the assignment, and then with AI come back and that assignment looks amazing. And you're like, great, this is excellent work. I could even have someone else do the assignment for me and you're like, great, this is excellent work, but it's not really mine, right? My ability to articulate and represent my lived experiences is what's really gonna indicate how comfortable I am with the type of work I'm being asked to do.
So, why does the offer narrative matter so much in AI roles?
Yeah, in most scenarios, when building an AI team and you have very highly qualified, talented candidates, they have multiple offers, or if they don't have multiple offers, they're already in a role that they're satisfied with. So, do you want to compete on compensation? Probably not, because there's always someone who can pay more, right? And so taking the time to think through narrative, what do we have to offer above and beyond that would keep this person interested in the role? I have a friend who was considering a role that paid probably 50% more than a role that he had just taken. And he said, should I entertain it? And obviously the increase in compensation was an exciting opportunity, but the reality is the higher paying role didn't give him the opportunity to get on the ground experience with frontier AI technology, right? And coming back to the example, he had an opportunity to work in a role where he was directly working in leading AI initiatives. That meant a lot. That meant more than a 50% increase in compensation. We hear stories about people getting paid more. We don't hear a lot of the stories about people being more satisfied in a role because the narrative or the other things that they are offered outside of compensation ends up having more value to the individual.
That's true. Why share the 30, 60, or 90 plan before the offer is signed?
Yeah, it shows that you've been thoughtful about the role. There's a lot of noise. That's on both sides, right? That's the company and that's candidates. And as a company who's going out to hire, There's a lot of hype around AI, and everyone wants to sell what the candidate will be able to do. And the market is maturing more on both sides, where companies are able to kind of weed through more of the BS on the candidate side, but on the other side, candidates are seeing companies that are offering smoke and mirrors. And to really have a 30, 60, 90-day plan gives the candidate more confidence that when they step into the role, they're going to be doing exactly what they expect to be doing. And I think if you're talking about experienced candidates, people have already gone through the battles, right, of joining a team and you're told you're going to do one thing and then you're doing something completely different that you are not excited about doing, right? And so I think you can pray that the person is going to be excited about the role and keep things general. But for the most part, you'll have much better luck if you can define 30, 60, 90 days. It'll be a much more compelling conversation with the candidate. And quite frankly, if you're talking with someone who is very experienced, who you're expecting to come in and add some sort of leadership or some sort of lived experience that can help move you forward, they may help you better define the 30, 60, 90-day plan.